The obsidian walls of the High Synod reflected the dim, dying light of the holographic star map, casting long, distorted shadows that seemed to dance with the collective anxiety of the assembled counselors. The air within the vast, vaulted chamber was thick with the scent of ozone and the pheromones of terrified physiological responses, a chemical cocktail of dread that no ventilation system could fully purge. High Counselor Valerius stood at the center of the dais, his multifaceted eyes dull and clouded, staring up at the projection of the galactic rim where the darkness was not merely the absence of light, but a physical, consuming force. They called it the entropy tide, a wave of subspatial decay that had already swallowed the outer colonies, leaving nothing but silence and gravitational anomalies in its wake. There was no debris, no wreckage, no refugees, only the cessation of existence. The Concordat, a union of 12 sentient species that had spanned the stars for 10,000 cycles, was facing its extinction, and they were facing it with the paralyzed dignity of a civilization that had forgotten how to fight for its survival. The silence in the chamber was broken only by the rhythmic thrumming of the deep-core energy generators far below, a sound like a failing heartbeat. Valerius shifted his weight, his chitinous armor clicking softly, a sound that seemed deafening in the stillness. He looked toward the communications officer, a slender, avian-descended being whose feathers were ruffled in a permanent state of distress. The officer shook their head slowly, a gesture of hopelessness that needed no translation. The distress beacon, a hyperwave signal amplified by the entire energy output of their dying sun, had been screaming into the void for 3 standard cycles. It had been directed not toward their allies, who were already dead or fleeing, but toward the unknown regions, the sectors of space marked on every chart with the crimson warning glyphs of the Deathworlders. The debate to send the signal had been fierce, nearly resulting in civil war within the Council itself. To invite the Deathworlders was considered by many to be a suicide more painful than the entropy tide. "Still nothing?" Valerius asked, his voice a low rasp that vibrated through the chamber's acoustics. "The signal has propagated beyond the galactic arm. If there were listeners, they have heard." General Kale, a towering reptilian warlord whose species had once conquered nebulas before the peace of the Concordat softened them, slammed a heavy fist onto his console. "They have heard and they ignore us," Kale growled, his throat sac swelling with frustration. "Or worse, they are coming to scavenge. You know the legends of the Terrans as well as I do, Valerius. They are not saviors. They are creatures of high gravity and higher aggression. Their atmosphere is poison. Their history is a catalog of self-destruction. To think they would aid us out of altruism is a delusion born of desperation. We have exposed our throat to a predator to save us from a storm." Valerius closed his eyes, feeling the weight of the decision crushing his spirit. "We have no other throat to expose, General. The tide moves faster than our fleets. The evacuation arcs are stalled. Our shields crumble under the subspatial pressure. If the Terrans are monsters, let them be monsters that fight. I would rather be enslaved by the living than dissolved into nothingness by the dark." The chamber murmured with dissent and agreement, a ripple of discordant sound. The Xylian Concordat had spent millennia cultivating art, philosophy, and diplomatic grace. They had terraformed worlds into gardens, uplifted primitive species with gentleness, and woven a society based on aesthetic perfection. They looked upon the Terrans, isolated in their chaotic, radiation-soaked sector, as a quarantine zone. The few times Terran vessels had been spotted on long-range sensors, they were described as jagged, ugly things, scars against the velvet of space, leaking radiation and broadcasting discordant noise. The Terrans did not terraform, they cracked planets. They did not weave, they forged. And now the garden called for the hammer. Suddenly, the sensor grid screamed. It was not a blip or a ping. It was a shriek of electronic agony that tore through the speakers, causing several counselors to clamp their auditory receptors shut. The holographic map flickered violently, the red stain of the entropy tide momentarily washing out as a new signal bloomed in the center of the display, right in the high orbit of their capital world, bypassing the outer defense nets entirely. The laws of physics, as the Concordat understood them, dictated that an object exiting faster than light travel must decelerate at the system's edge to avoid gravitational shear. The new arrival ignored this law with brutal indifference. Space-time above the capital did not fold elegantly, it tore open. A rupture in reality appeared on the main view screen, a jagged wound in the cosmos that bled violet Cherenkov radiation. From this tear, a shape emerged that silenced even General Kale. It was not a ship in the sense of a vessel designed for travel. It was a moving mountain of metal and composite armor, a brutalist slab of engineering that blocked out the sun. It possessed no graceful curves, no aerodynamic lines, no shimmering energy sails. It was a block of charred gray and matte black, covered in thick plating that looked like it had been hammered into place by giants. Enormous exhaust vents, large enough to swallow a Concordat cruiser hull, vented plumes of superheated plasma that drifted like angry nebulas around the hull. The surface of the vessel was pockmarked with craters and scorch marks, evidence of battles or environments that would have vaporized a standard warship. "Sensor readings," Cale barked, his voice cracking with genuine fear. "Give me mass and energy output." The science officer, a being of liquid optics and trembling limbs, stared at their console in horror. "The mass! It registers as a planetary body, General. The energy output from its reactor core is spiking off the scale. It has a singularity on board. They have chained a black hole to their engine drive. By the void, the gravitational displacement alone is causing tidal warnings on the planet's surface." The vessel hung there, looming over the capital city, casting a literal shadow over the Synod building. Along its hull, massive, jagged letters were painted in a stark, industrial white, scarred by cosmic dust but still legible to the universal translator, UES Hephaestus. Beneath the name, a symbol, a hammer striking an anvil, surrounded by a wreath of thorns. "They are hailing us," the communications officer whispered, terror draining the color from their plumage. "Wideband transmission, audio only, the signal strength is aggressive. They are overriding our encryption." Valerius gripped the podium, his claws digging into the stone. "Put it on. Let us hear our executioners." The static cleared, replaced not by the smooth, melodic tones of Concordat diplomacy, but by a voice that sounded like gravel grinding against steel. It was deep, calm, and utterly devoid of panic, a stark contrast to the hysteria in the room. "This is Captain Halloway of the United Earth System's heavy engineering vessel Hephaestus," the voice rumbled, echoing through the grand chamber like thunder in a canyon. "We received a code black SOS regarding a localized subspatial collapse. We are scanning your magnetosphere. You have a Class 5 entropic fissure eating your star system. Your shields are paper. Collapse is imminent in 4 hours." There was a pause, a heavy silence where the counselors expected a demand for surrender or tribute, or a declaration of war. "We are deploying the anchors," the human voice continued, sounding as if he were discussing a weather report rather than the apocalypse. I repeat, do not target our drones. If you fire on us, the feedback loop will shatter your planet's crust. Stay out of our way. Hephaestus out." The channel cut with a sharp click. "They are deploying weapons," Cale shouted, pointing at the screen. "Look, they are launching projectiles toward the fissure." From the ventral bay of the massive human monstrosity, huge cylinders were being ejected. They were the size of skyscrapers, propelled by solid fuel rockets that left dirty trails of smoke in the pristine upper atmosphere. They did not look like sensors or aid packages. They looked like warheads. They sped toward the encroaching wall of darkness that was the entropy tide, trailing thick cables of braided alloy that connected back to the Hephaestus. "They are harpooning the void," the science officer gasped, their liquid eyes widening. "Those cables! The tension sensors are reading impossible loads. They intend to physically tether the collapse." Valerius watched, mesmerized and horrified. "They are not attacking us, General. They are attacking the phenomenon." "With physical cables," Cale scoffed, though his hand hovered over the fleet defense grid controls. "That is madness. You cannot tether a subspatial rift. It requires harmonic resonance modulation, subtle energy weaving. You cannot just grab a hole in the universe." "The Terrans are Deathworlders," Valerius murmured, a strange realization dawning on him. "They do not weave, they wrestle." First of the massive harpoons struck the event horizon of the entropy tide. There was no explosion, but a massive distortion of light. The cable snapped taut, vibrating with such intensity that the sensors picked up the hum as a seismic event. Then the second struck. Then the third. The Hephaestus fired its maneuvering thrusters, massive banks of engines that erupted with the fury of a solar flare. The ship groaned, a sound transmitted through the very fabric of space, a metallic scream of stress and torque. The Huma-en ship was trying to hold back the tide of nothingness by sheer brute force and engine power. Inside the High Synod, the floor trembled. The holographic display showed the impossible. The rate of the tide's advance had slowed. It hadn't stopped, but it had slowed. The Terran ship was acting as a dam, a plug, dragging against the inevitable decay of the universe with engines designed to move moons. "They are buying us time," Valeria said, his voice trembling. "But for what? They cannot hold that forever. The structural integrity of that ship must be failing. Nothing built by mortal hands can withstand that stress." As if to answer him, the comms channel crackled to life again. This time, a video feed established itself. The screen flickered, resolving into the image of the Hephaestus's bridge. It was nothing like the sleek, clean bridges of the Concordat fleet. It was a dark, cramped cave of metal, illuminated by the harsh glow of warning lights and tactical displays. Wires hung from the ceiling in chaotic bundles. Steam vented from pipes running along the bulkheads. And in the center, strapped into a chair that looked more like an electric chair than a command throne, sat Captain Holloway. He was a terrifying figure to the delicate Xylians. He was bald, his scalp scarred with a cybernetic eye that glowed a menacing red. His skin was pale and leathery, and he wore a heavy suit that looked like powered armor stripped of its plating. He was sweating, his teeth grit together, his hands flying over a tactile interface that sparked with feedback. Behind him, the crew, a mix of humans and heavyset cyborgs, were shouting commands, not in panic, but in the rhythmic, disciplined chant of a crew working in a foundry. "Concordat control," Holloway grunted, not looking at the camera. "We have a grapple on the anomaly. It's heavier than we thought. The fabric of reality here is thin. You've overmined the subspace layers with your transit gates. You broke the bedrock of your local space." Valeria stepped forward, his diplomatic training failing him. Captain Holloway, we did not know. We sought only to travel. Can you stop it?" Holloway laughed, a dry, humorless bark. "Stop it? No, gravity always wins eventually, but we can stitch it shut. We're going to perform a kinetic suture. It's going to get rough down there. I need you to shut down every active energy grid on your planet. If you have a power plant running, kill it. If you have a shield up, drop it. We need the electromagnetic spectrum clear for the arc weld." "Drop our shields?" Kale roared, stepping into the pickup field. "With that thing looming over us, you ask us to be defenseless while you dangle a weapon over our heads." Holloway's human eye, the organic one, shifted to look at the general. It was cold, blue, and incredibly tired. "General, if I wanted you dead, I would have just let the tide hit you. It was doing a fine job on its own. Now kill the power or the feedback from our arc driver will fry every nervous system on your planet. You have 5 minutes." The feed cut again. The chamber erupted into chaos. Alien diplomats screamed at one another. Some called for an attack on the human ship, others begged for compliance. Valerius looked at the screen, at the struggling, ugly ship fighting a tug-of-war with oblivion. He saw the fire venting from its hull, the debris sloughing off its armor as the gravitational stress tore at it. They were hurting themselves to hold the line. "Do it," Valerius commanded, his voice cutting through the noise. "High Counselor," Kale asked, stunned. "Shut it down, everything. The global grid, the defense net, the orbital tethers, go dark, now." There was a moment of hesitation, and then orders were barked. One by one, the lights on the planetary map winked out. The great cities of the Xylian homeworld, beacons of civilization for centuries, faded into the night. The hum of the atmosphere scrubbers died. The planet became silent, a dark sphere hanging in the void. All eyes turned to the sky. Above them, the Hephaestus began to change. The massive forward section of the ship split open, vast hydraulic mechanisms grinding with a sound that could be felt in the teeth. From the center of the ship, a spire emerged, a long, needle-like cannon that crackled with energies the Concordat scientists had no names for. It wasn't a laser. It was a projector of pure, concentrated nuclear force and strange matter. "They are firing," someone screamed. The ship didn't fire at the planet. It fired at the cables. A pulse of blinding white light ran down the massive harpoons, traveling from the ship to the event horizon of the tide. The energy was so intense that the atmosphere of the planet ionized, creating auroras that spanned from pole to pole. The human ship was channeling the raw power of its singularity drive directly into the tier in space. "They are not just holding it," the science officer whispered, tears of awe leaking from their eyes. "They are cauterizing the wound. They are using the cables as conductive filaments to melt spacetime back together." The light became unbearable. The sensors on the planet went blind. For a minute, there was only white, and the sound of the universe screaming in protest as it was forced to heal by a species that treated physics like metallurgy. Then silence. The light faded. The sensors rebooted, flickering with static before clearing. The darkness was gone. The tide had vanished. In its place, space was scarred, a jagged line of distorted starlight where the rift had been, looking like a welt on the skin of the sky. But the consuming nothingness was gone. The stars were back. The Hephaestus drifted in low orbit. It looked dead. The running lights were out. The massive engine plumes were gone. It listed to one side, leaking atmosphere and debris. Did they survive? Valerius asked into the silence. Scanning, the officer replied. Life support is minimal. Their main reactor is offline. They blew their own drive core to seal the breach. They are adrift. Kale stared at the crippled giant. They sacrificed their propulsion to save us? Why, we called them monsters. We quarantined their sector. Perhaps, Valerius said softly, monsters are the only ones strong enough to fight the dark. The hours that followed were a blur of frenetic activity. The Concordat fleets, shamed by their inaction, scrambled to launch rescue shuttles. Tugs were dispatched to stabilize the massive Terran vessel. Valerius insisted on leading the delegation to the Hephaestus himself. He needed to look these Deathworlders in the eye. He needed to understand. The interior of the human ship was a nightmare of industrial claustrophobia. The corridors were cramped, lit by emergency red strobes, and smelled of burnt copper and sweat. The gravity was heavy, oppressive, making Valerius's joints ache. He saw human crew members, bruised, bandaged, covered in grease and soot, working with calm efficiency to patch hull breaches. They didn't look like soldiers. They looked like laborers. They ignored the delicate, robed aliens walking through their halls, focusing entirely on their machines. They reached the bridge. It was a wreck. Consoles were sparked out. The air was hazy with smoke. Captain Holloway sat on the deck, his back against the command chair, a medic wrapping a bandage around his arm. He looked up as the aliens entered, his cybernetic eye whirring as it focused. Captain, Valerius said, bowing low, a gesture reserved for emperors. You have saved our world. You have saved the Concordat. We are in your debt. Holloway grunted and took a sip from a canteen. Debt? We don't want your debt. Just stop drilling into subspace. You're compromising the structural integrity of the sector. Next time the wall falls down and we might not be close enough to catch it. You monitor these things? Kale asked, stepping forward, his aggression replaced by confusion. We thought you were isolated, trapped in your gravity wells. Holloway stood up, groaning as his knees popped. He towered over the aliens. Trapped? No, we're not trapped. We're the maintenance crew. He limped over to a shattered viewport, looking out at the stars of the Concordat. You folks, you live in the penthouse of the galaxy. Nice views, clean air, soft lights. You spend your time making art and debating philosophy. That's good. That's what life should be. He turned back to them, his expression grim. But a penthouse needs a foundation, and the foundation of this universe is rotten. Entropy, dark energy, subspace fractures. The basement is flooding constantly. Someone has to go down into the muck and keep the pipes from bursting. Someone has to hold the walls up so you can play your music upstairs. That is why you are different, Valerius asked. Why your ships are built like hammers. We are Deathworlders, Holloway said, owning the slur. We evolved in a meat grinder. We survived ice ages, plagues, volcanoes, and each other. We learned that the universe tries to kill you and you have to hit it back. When we got to the stars, we saw the cracks. We saw that the galaxy wasn't a garden, it was a crumbling building. So we put on our hard hats and we got to work. You protect us, the science minister whispered, without us even knowing. We don't do it for you, Holloway said, his voice dropping. We do it because if the foundation goes, the whole house comes down. Earth, the Concordat, all of it. But the cost, Valerius said, looking around the ruined bridge. Your ship is crippled, your people are hurt. The Hephaestus is a tough old girl. She'll fly again. We have spare parts, Holloway shrugged. But look, we have a problem. Blowing the core fried our FTL comms. We can't call for a tow, and we're a long way from the Terran dry docks. Valerius straightened his spine. You will not need a tow to Terran space, the Co. Concordat shipyards are at your disposal. Our resources are yours. We cannot forge the metal you forge, but we can weave the energy you need. We will repair your vessel. It is the least we can do. Holloway looked at the alien, really looked at him for the first time. He saw not a frightened bureaucrat, but a being recognizing a hard truth. The human captain cracked a slight, crooked smile. Careful, counselor. You start letting Deathworlders into your ports, the property value is gonna go down. We're loud and we drink stuff that would melt your insides. I think, Valerius replied, a newfound strength in his voice, that we have been too concerned with the quiet. A little noise is preferable to the silence of the grave. The repair of the Hephaestus took 6 months. In that time, the culture of the capital world changed. It was a subtle shift, but undeniable. The fear of the Terrans evaporated, replaced by a fascination with their rugged, utilitarian aesthetic. Young Xylians began to study engineering, abandoning abstract poetry for the hard mathematics of structural integrity. They watched the humans work, amazed by their endurance, their ability to function in high gravity, their stubborn refusal to accept impossible as an answer. The humans, in turn, softened slightly. They found the alien food palatable if under-seasoned. They appreciated the medical technology that healed their scars without the need for crude cybernetics. Diplomacy happened not in the High Synod, but in the mess halls and the dry docks, over shared meals and schematics. When the Hephaestus was finally ready to launch, it looked different. The scars were still there. The humans refused to paint over them, calling them badges of honor. But the engines glowed with a cleaner, more refined light, courtesy of Concordat harmonic crystals. The hull was reinforced with Xylian nanoweave, making it stronger than steel. It was a hybrid, a monster in a tuxedo, ugly and beautiful all at once. The departure ceremony was attended by the entire High Council. Valerius stood on the flight deck, watching Holloway prep his team. "You are leaving," Valerius said, "back to the dark sectors." "The work never stops," Holloway said, checking his suit seals. "We picked up a tremor in the Veil Nebula. Something big is pushing against the membrane of this reality. We have to go reinforce the bulkhead." "You fight a war we cannot see," Valerius mused. "It's not a war, Counselor, it's maintenance. Just keep the lights on for us, all right." "Always," Valerius promised. As the Hephaestus fired its engines, a deep, resonant boom that shook the station, Valerius turned to Kale. The general was watching the ship with a look of profound respect. "They are dangerous," Kale said quietly. "Yes," Valerius agreed. "They are the most dangerous things in the galaxy, and thank the stars they are on our side." But the story did not end with the departure. As the Hephaestus reached the edge of the system to initiate its jump, a signal came through to the High Synod. It was an encoded data packet from the human ship, sent on a tight beam directly to Valerius's personal console. Valerius opened it. It was a map. It was not a map of stars or planets. It was a map of the structural stress points of the galaxy. It showed thousands of fissures, cracks, and weak points where the universe was wearing thin, and at every major fracture there was a small, blinking icon, a Terran ship. Valerius zoomed out, looking at the scale of it. The Terrans weren't just a civilization, they were a scaffolding. They had turned their entire species into a planetary engineering corps dispersed across the dark to hold the roof up. And then he saw the edge of the map. Beyond the galaxy, in the deep void between galaxies, there was something else. The Terran sensors had mapped a shape in the darkness. It was massive, spanning light years. It looked like a claw or a hand pressing against the outer rim of the Milky Way. The text attached to the data file was short, written by Holloway. "We told you we were the maintenance crew. We didn't tell you why the building is crumbling. Something is outside, Counselor. Something is pushing in. The entropy tide wasn't a natural disaster. It was a breach attempt. We've been holding the door shut for 3,000 years. We're tired. We're going to need help. Start building bigger ships, not for travel, for war." Valerius stared at the data, the blood draining from his face. The realization hit him with the force of a physical blow. The humans hadn't just saved them from a glitch in physics. They were the garrison at the gate of hell. He looked up at the view screen, where the Hephaestus was just a speck of exhaust against the stars. The dangerous ship was gone, heading into the dark to wrestle with gods. Valerius turned to the council, his voice steady, his eyes burning with a new, terrifying purpose. "Cancel the Peace Festival," he ordered, "and bring me the specifications for the Terran alloy. We have work to do." The garden was closed. It was time to build a fortress. The era of the silence was over. The era of the Iron Pact had begun. And somewhere in the dark, the Hephaestus burned its engines, a lone candle against the encroaching night, carrying the fire of humanity to the places where the universe wanted to die, and saying with the stubborn arrogance of a Deathworlder, "No, not today." The atmosphere in the High Synod had changed irrevocably. The soft, ambient lighting that had been designed to soothe the nerves of sensitive species was dialed up to a harsh, clinical white. The holographic maps that once displayed trade routes and cultural exchange zones were now overlaid with the Terran structural data, the spiderweb of fractures that threatened their existence. Fleet Admiral Kale, who had once looked upon the Terrans with disdain, now stood before a simulation of a Terran gravity anchor. "Their engineering is madness," he muttered, though his tone was one of intense study. "They use controlled singularities not just for propulsion, but as structural reinforcement. They are literally bending space to hold the hull together. If we attempt this with our current materials, our ships will implode." "Then we improve our materials," Valerius said, walking down the central aisle of the chamber. He felt different. He felt heavier. The knowledge of what lay outside the galaxy, the thing in the dark, pressed on his mind like a physical weight. "The Terrans have given us the blueprint. We must provide the refinement." A young researcher, a cephalopodon from the aquatic moon of Encelad, raised a tentacle. "High Counselor, to replicate the Terran alloy density, we would need to retool our orbital foundries entirely. We would need to stop producing consumer goods, luxury transports, the atmospheric stabilizers. It would essentially put our economy on a war footing. The populace will panic." "Let them panic," Valerius said, his voice cold. "Panic is a survival mechanism. Complacency is death. Show them the footage of the entropy tide. Show them the Hephaestus bleeding fire to save us. Then show them the shadow on the edge of the map." He paused, looking at the diverse assembly of species before him. "We called the humans Deathworlders because we thought their environment made them savage. We were wrong. Their environment made them necessary. A sword is forged in fire, not in a garden. We have been living in the garden for too long. The weeds are encroaching." The transition was not easy. The Xylian Concordat was a society built on comfort and aesthetic beauty. To turn it into a military-industrial complex was to fight against 10,000 years of cultural inertia. There were protests. There were riots on the pleasure worlds. Philosophers argued that adopting Terran methods would corrupt the soul of the Concordat. But Valerius remained unyielding. He had seen the void. He had seen the eyes of Captain Halloway, eyes that had seen the end of the world and refused to blink. 3 cycles later, a subspace relay buoy on the edge of the Perseus arm activated. It was a Terran frequency. The message was not an SOS, it was a coordinate. "Sector 7G, the tier is widening. Bring the needle." It was a test. Halloway was calling them. Valerius stood on the bridge of the newly christened Concordat flagship, the Aegis. It was not a blocky nightmare like the Hephaestus. It still retained the elegant curves of Xylian design, the shimmering pearlescent hull, the silent engines. But beneath the beauty lay a skeleton of hyperdense alloy, copied from the human scans, and in its belly it carried a gravity loom, a refined, more precise version of the Terran anchor. "Fleet readiness?" Valerius asked. Kale, now clad in combat armor that looked strangely similar to the Terran styles, nodded. "The Aegis is green. The escort wing is standing by. We have 12 cruisers fitted with the new shielding." "Set course for Sector 7G, Valerius ordered. "Let us see if we can be maintenance crew." The jump was smooth, far smoother than the tearing rupture of the Terran drive. When they dropped out of FTL, the scene before them was apocalyptic. Sector 7G was a graveyard of stars. A massive rift, far larger than the one that had threatened the capital, was pulsating in the center of the system. It was bleeding a color that shouldn't exist, a sickening anti-light that made the eyes ache. Around the rift, a small fleet of Terran ships, ugly, industrial, scarred, were swarming like bees. They were firing grappling beams, launching gravity charges, trying desperately to hold the edges of the wound together. But they were losing. The rift was growing. "This is the UES Ironheart to unidentified vessels," a panicked human voice crackled over the comms. "Clear the area. We have a containment breach. The membrane is snapping." "This is High Counselor Valerius of the Aegis," Valerius replied, his voice calm. "We are not clearing the area. We are engaging." "Valerius," the voice was incredulous. "You brought a luxury liner to a knife fight. Get out of here. The gravitational shear will tear those pretty fins right off." "Deploy the loom," Valerius ordered, ignoring the human. The Aegis moved forward. It didn't roar like the Hephaestus. It hummed, a sound of perfect harmonic resonance. From its forward emitters, it didn't fire cables. It fired beams of coherent graviton particles, weaving them into a lattice of pure force. The beams hit the rift. Unlike the brutal stitching of the Terrans, the Xylian approach was surgical. The lattice spread over the tier, distributing the stress evenly across the fabric of space. On the bridge of the Ironheart, the human commander watched his sensors in disbelief. The chaotic readings from the rift began to stabilize. The jagged edges of reality smoothed out, pulled together by the delicate, unbreakable web of the Xylian beam. Stabilization at 40%, the Xylian tactical officer reported. But the stress on the emitters is critical. We need more power. Drain the life support, Valerius said without hesitation. Drain the shields, divert all power to the loom. Sir, if we drop shields, the radiation from the rift will. Do it. The lights on the Aegis dimmed. The air grew stale, but the beam intensified, glowing with a blinding golden light. The rift began to close. The Terran ships, seeing what was happening, adapted instantly. They ceased their chaotic grappling and moved into formation around the Aegis, extending their own shields to cover the Xylian ship. They formed a phalanx, a wall of iron protecting the Weaver of Light. Cover them, the human commander shouted. Don't let a single micrometer of debris hit that ship. It was a dance of two philosophies. The Terrans provided the brute strength, the shield, the iron will. The Concordat provided the finesse, the science, the art, the hammer and the needle. With a final silent flash, the rift sealed. The universe healed. The Aegis powered down, its emitters smoking. Valerius slumped in his chair, exhausted. We did it, Cale breathed. We actually did it. The comms beeped. The face of the Ironheart's commander appeared. He looked like Holloway, rough, tired, unshaven, but he was smiling. Nice flying, fancy pants, the human said. I've never seen anyone weave gravity like that. You folks are crazy. We learned from the best, Valerius replied, smoothing his robes. You know, the commander said, his expression turning serious. That rift, it wasn't natural either. Something was pushing from the other side, probing. We know, Valerius said. Holloway told us. Good, because we can't be everywhere at once. The line is thin. We've been needing a partner. You have one, Valerius said. The Concordat stands with Terra. The garden is closed. The fortress is open. The human nodded. Welcome to the night shift, counselor. Coffee's terrible, the hours are long, and the hazards are fatal. But the view is worth it. Valerius looked out at the healed stars, shining bright and stable in the velvet dark. Yes, he said, it is. The alliance between the Concordat and the United Earth systems fundamentally altered the trajectory of galactic history. They called it the binary Aegis. The humans built the hulls and the engines. The Concordat built the sensors and the stabilizers. Together, they created a fleet of ships that defied categorization. They were massive, brutal, yet elegant, leviathans of black iron laced with veins of golden light. They patrolled the perimeter of the galaxy, hunting for the stress fractures, the weak points. They found abandoned megastructures on the rim, ancient machines left by a precursor race that had failed to hold the line. They realized that the death-world nature of Earth was not an accident, but a biological contingency plan. The universe, in its immune response to the encroaching outside, had evolved a species capable of enduring absolute hell, specifically to man the walls when the time came. And come it did. 10 years after the incident at Sector 7G, the Great Breach occurred. It wasn't a rift, it was a shatter. An entire sector of space, spanning 50 light-years, simply collapsed. From the breach they came, not ships but entities, creatures of non-baryonic matter composed of the void between galaxies. They were the silence that the Xylians had feared. They were the entropy that the humans had fought. They sought to unravel the laws of physics, to return the ordered universe to a state of perfect, cold chaos. The binary Aegis was waiting. Thousands of ships, human dreadnoughts with Concordat harmonic cores, Xylian carriers deploying wings of Terran drone fighters. On the bridge of the flagship synthesis, High Chancellor Valerius, now old and scarred, stood next to Fleet Admiral Holloway. They are beautiful in a terrible way, Valerius said, watching the swarm of void entities. Pour through the breach. They're bugs, Holloway growled, lighting a cigar, a habit Valerius had surprisingly come to tolerate. And we're the windshield. Ready the resonance cannons, Valerius ordered. Charge the singularity drivers, Holloway barked. The fleet fired as one. It was not just a barrage of energy, it was an assertion of reality. The weapons they used imposed order upon chaos. They fired laws of physics, Gravity, electromagnetism, strong nuclear force condensed into beams that shattered the void entities, forcing them to obey the rules of the universe or cease to exist. The battle lasted for weeks. Stars burned out, planets were cracked, but the line held. In the final moments of the conflict, the entities coalesced into a single, massive form, a titan of nothingness that dwarfed the combined fleet. It reached out, intending to swipe the annoyance of the binary Aegis from existence. "It's too big," Kale shouted from the tactical station. "Our weapons can't disperse that much mass." Holloway looked at Valerius. There was a silent understanding between them. A plan they had discussed over bottles of Terran whiskey and Xylian nectar, a plan for the absolute worst-case scenario. "The protocol," Holloway said softly. Valerius nodded. "The protocol." "All ships fall back," Holloway ordered. "The synthesis will engage." "What are you doing?" The captains of the other ships screamed over the comms. "We're going to stitch it shut," Valerius said into the microphone. "From the inside." The synthesis did not fire. It accelerated. It poured every ounce of power into its engines, driving straight into the heart of the Void Titan. As they crossed the threshold, the world dissolved into madness. Geometry failed. Time became a loop. But the synthesis held together, bound by the unyielding iron of Earth and the harmonious light of Xylia. "Active the Omega anchor," Holloway said, his hand hovering over the lever. "It has been an honor, Captain," Valerius said. "Likewise, Counselor." They pulled the lever. The synthesis didn't explode. It expanded. The singularity drive, modified with Xylian resonance tech, inverted. It created a localized Big Bang, a bubble of pure, absolute creation in the heart of destruction. From the outside, the fleet saw a new star satisfy itself into existence. A brilliant, blinding white star that burned away the Void Titan, dissolving its shadows with the light of 1,000,000,000 suns. The breach was cauterized instantly. The silence returned, but it was not the silence of the grave. It was the silence of peace. The synthesis was gone. Holloway and Valerius were gone. But in their place burned the beacon, a permanent, artificial star that stood at the gateway of the galaxy, a lighthouse warning the dark to stay away. Generations later, the binary Aegis still patrols the rim. Humans and Xylians and a dozen other species live and work together on the great station ships. They tell stories of the first encounter, of the SOS that was sent to the monsters, of the dangerous ship that arrived. They teach their children that the universe is a dark and hostile place, filled with things that want to consume the light. They teach them that fear is natural, but paralysis is fatal. And when they look out at the beacon, burning eternally on the edge of the map, they remember the lesson of the Deathworlders. When the darkness knocks, you do not hide. You open the door and you introduce it to the fire. The galaxy is a garden, yes, but every garden has a wall, and on that wall the monsters stand guard, watching, waiting, and daring the night to try again. And in the deep silence of the void, nothing answers. The message has been received. Do not touch the garden. The gardeners are armed.